Well, welcome everyone again to our webinar. I'm Jackie Bennett. I'm the Chief Officer of the Cheshire and Merseyside Health and Care Partnership. Some of you, if not all of you, were on our call last week. Apologies once again, and glad you're able to make the rerun. I should say at the outset, the minute we get a hint of any intrusion, and I hope we don't, but if we do, it's all going to shut down immediately with no further discussion. So hopefully we'll be uninterrupted this time, and we look forward to sharing our work with you. Many of you have said and recognise this is an important piece of work, looking at the experience of our BAME communities over the period of the COVID. We know they've been disproportionately affected, and we need to understand in as many ways as possible, but in particular how we're going to respond in terms of vaccination, communication, engagement, etc. So without further ado, I'm going to hand you over to Edna, who's been leading on this project, to share once again our thoughts with you, and we look forward to hearing your thoughts before we wrap up at the end of today on how we take this work forward to the next steps. Over to you, Edna. Thank you.
Thank you, Jackie. So can you just give me a thumbs up if you can see the slide? Yeah, great. Yeah. So thank you very much. I think I'm not going to dwell too much on what happened last week because, to be quite honest, I don't want to give the people that are responsible the satisfaction of knowing that we're still discussing it. But what I would like to do is thank you all for all of the messages of support that you sent through. It has strengthened our resolve, and it's highlighted to us just how important this work is. So the show must go on, as they say. So just a few housekeepings again, as I did last week. We have got a really tight agenda. We have made some changes to the agenda, so it isn't just going to be a complete rerun of last week. But you will have noticed that you will be muted when you enter the webinar. We are going to unmute you at the point that we are taking questions, but so you will not be able to unmute. So please do put any comments or questions in the chat, because the chat box will be monitored and we'll pick those questions up at the end. We are recording the webinar as well, so just to let you all know that, and also we will be making the recording available afterwards, a few days after the event. So the agenda, I've just taken you through the housekeeping, but in a moment I'm then going to take us through a quick overview of the project. Now I won't focus on it for too long because I ran through it last week. We're then going to take you through the 10 key findings, and we've got just a Brucey bonus which we're adding, so this is something that you haven't seen from last week. Another bit that we've added to this session is we will talk through how we are using our findings and the insight to then develop a strategy for engaging with our BAME communities that are we call them vaccine hesitants. We'll then have a question and answer, a chance for you to ask some questions. We'll then go into some breakout groups, which I'll talk to you about in a moment. And then we'll do a bit of a wrap up, and I'll let you know what our next steps are in terms of what we are doing next and how you can access some of the outputs of our work. And lastly, now we put out a poll and we asked people what they wanted us to repeat. Now, overwhelmingly, most people said they wanted us to repeat the 10 key findings, so we've done that. But in terms of the phase 1 output, that was split. So there was quite a few people that said they did, and then there was quite a lot of people that said they didn't want that to be repeated. So we've tucked that away at the end. So if people do want to have the demonstration of the interactive tool again and be able to ask Jeff, who actually built the tool, some questions, we've got 5 minutes at the end that people can stay on and ask those questions. And clearly, if you don't want to, you can jump off the call. Again, we're on social media, we're on Twitter, we're on Facebook, so please do follow us, tweet. We'll also put the details in the chat, so you've got easy access to it. And also please use the chat box, use the hashtag CMBameWork. So I guess just very briefly, I don't think you need me to talk too much about why we undertook this work. The coronavirus pandemic has exposed the stark inequalities that exist throughout our society. And we recognised that some groups were being more disproportionately impacted than others. And as I said, when we started this work 5 months ago, we knew it was important, and we were acutely aware of how important it was to understand how the pandemic was impacting people from our BAME communities. But it was important for us to not only understand the impact it's having now, but to give us some guidance on what we could do to support them in the future. And clearly, one of the key priorities of the partnership is to reduce inequalities. And we recognise that unless we got a better understanding of our BAME communities and how the coronavirus pandemic is impacting them, and how generally how some of the issues that are faced within that community, if we didn't do that, then that inequality gap would just keep on widening. The other thing that coronavirus also exposed was that we saw that there were lots of people that weren't accessing services in the same way. And we already know that some people from our BAME communities are less likely to take up screening services, preventative services. And again, the concern was that inequality gap will get wider, and actually, because of the fear factor of coronavirus, that some people would continue to not access services. So all of that wrapped up, we felt like we needed to do something robust to actually get that insight to be able to support the communities. Just quickly to give you an overview of how we approached this. The first element was about getting that deeper understanding of where people lived and a little bit more about their makeup. The second element, which is what we're showcasing today, was the quantitative research, where we aimed for 500 interviews for people from ethnic communities across Cheshire and Mersey. And it's worth saying as well, when I first started putting this proposal together, and I spoke to a number of academics and people that were working in this area, and I said to them, need to work at pace. So I'm putting this proposal together. It all needs to be done and dusted within 4 months. I want to target 500 interviews with people from these communities. I was told under no uncertain terms that wouldn't be possible, and I should lower my expectations. We wouldn't be able to get 500 interviews. Well, we showed them, and we were able to get a lot more than 500. So I was really pleased with that result. And finally, the qualitative research, which actually started this week. We really wanted you guys to have an opportunity to help us shape that research. So there is time, because we've only done 2 groups, and the idea was that we'd have this really good discussion about what the quantitative research is telling us and what else we need to find out, and that will help us inform the qualitative research. Well, we've still got time to do that, and that's what I hope will be one of the key outputs of this session. Lastly, this is just to give you an idea of some of the key outputs and deliverables, and what we think that it will help us how it will support us in Cheshire and Mersey. So we recognise that if we get a better understanding of our BAME communities, it can support some of the way we deliver our services and allocate our resources. I think it will help us to understand what we don't know and what we need to know more about. So it will help with education and training. Communication engagement is a huge part, and clearly as a comms and engagement person, I really wanted to understand how do we best communicate and engage with these communities in a way that resonates with them, and that is relevant to different communities. And lastly, which is really important, our COVID vac rollout and our testing delivery. How can we ensure that we are engaging people in the right way, at the right time, at the right place, or in the right place? So I'm going to hand over now to Duncan Swan. So that's right, it's not Karen Swan, it's Duncan Swan, who's the head of research at Influential, who's going to take us through phase 2. And what I'd like to have for you to think about whilst we are going through these slides, or whilst Duncan's taking you through these slides, is just these questions about what are your takeaways from the presentation, and what are some of the questions this has raised that we want to find out a little bit more through phase 3, and indeed further into the future, because what I would like to see from this piece of work is that this is not the end of what we do. This is just the beginning, and we need to keep engaging, keep asking questions, and keep understanding these communities if we really want to have any chance of closing that inequality gap. Over to you, Duncan.
Okay, thank you. Now, what I'm going to do now is give you a brief overview of what we did and how we did the survey. So, first of all, we did the field work. We started off at the beginning of December and we finished on the 24th of January. So, quite a long field work period, but the field work, the data is still very fresh. We only finished just over a month ago. Now, to qualify for interview, all respondents had to be a member of a BAME community and live within the 9 places covered by the partnership. Now, we generated the sample in 2 ways. First of all, we used an online panel, and from that we generated a representative sample of respondents. Now, in addition to this, we also directed respondents to a landing page, and we did that through a mixture of social media, PR activity, community outreach, and so that part of the sample was a little bit more self-selecting. Now, we weighted the sample by gender and place to make sure that it was representative on those 2 particular variables. Now, in terms of sample size, we as Edna said, we did very well, and we got over the 500, and we actually got to 636 respondents. And as you can see in that middle column, what we have is we have representation from all different groups in the sample by ethnic groups. So we were very pleased in the distribution of the sample. So really quite good sample. And also, just to let you know that we also got a third of the sample where English wasn't their main language. So we're able to connect with some of those more hard to reach respondents. Now, fact number one is about testing. And we asked people whether they've ever had COVID. And we asked it in 2 ways. We said, have you ever been tested for COVID, or have you ever had it, but you didn't think that, but you hadn't been tested? And you can see there that in the pink, those are the people who have actually been tested for COVID. And in total, we have 20% of people who, 25% of people who feel that they've had COVID in the past, either whether they've been tested or not. So 10% have been tested, 15% haven't. So we have quite a large group of people who feel they've had COVID, and that could affect take-up of the vaccine going forward. But you can also see there's some variation by the different ethnic groups. And if you have a look at the colours in the green, these are the people who felt ill but didn't necessarily take the test. And you can see that other Asians, Africans, Caribbeans and other blacks were a little bit higher than that. So those particular groups were more likely to feel they've got it but haven't been tested. So the key thing there, take out there, is is there an issue about testing going forward? Are people not getting tested? Now, what we're going to do now is we're going to go on to vaccinations. And we asked the question whether people will take the vaccination, and it was on a 5-point scale from I would definitely take it to I definitely not take it. And you can see there that take-up is actually quite good. You've got about 2/3 of people saying they're going to take the vaccine, but we have a small minority of people who would not. 13% said that they wouldn't take the vaccine. And also we've got about 1/5 of people, another group of people who are hesitant, who say, well, they might or might not take it, or they don't know. So these groups might need a nudge to take the vaccine. So what we're going to do now is we're going to drill down a little bit more and have a look at this by subgroups. And the subgroups we're going to look at first are men and women. And if you have a look at the results by men and women on the left-hand side, you can see that the results are broadly similar, but women are more polarized. You've got slightly more top box, but also you've got slightly more rejection as well. And what we think is happening there is that women are slightly more fearful of COVID, which could cause women to likely want the vaccine more, but also they're more concerned about the side effects. And that could be also causing that greater rejection. There could be other factors as well, in terms of maybe issues around if you're getting pregnant. Now, if you have a look at it by age, you can see that there's a nice relationship with age where propensity to take the vaccine increases as you get older. However, you can see that there are two thresholds. And once you get to 45 years of age, you can see the propensity to take it increases. And top box goes from 38 to 50%. And then it increases again when you get to 65, and it jumps up to 71%. Now, that increase in propensity is really because the number of hesitants gets smaller as you get older. But what doesn't happen is the amount of rejection gets smaller. So if you have a look at the rejection in the pink by age group, you can see that that is fairly stable by age group until you get to 65, which suggests that if you want to target people who reject, you might have to target communications at a wider age group. But if you're going for hesitance, you could target it more younger people. Now, if we have a look at this by ethnic group, now there's a lot of ethnic groups on this slide, and some of the base sizes are quite small, so you have to be quite careful about, there could be some noise in the data simply because of the small base sizes. But on this slide, what I'm going to do is just highlight a couple of ethnic groups where acceptance of the vaccine is quite strong, and then on the next slide, we'll have a look at those ethnic groups where are more hesitant about taking the vaccine. So on this slide, if you have a look at the white and black Caribbeans, 64% of this group said they would definitely take it. And also other Asians, 69% said they would take it. Now, the white and black Caribbean group are quite interesting because it was this group that was the most fearful of COVID, and that could be driving their greater uptake. Now, in terms of the groups that are more hesitant about taking the vaccination, we've pulled out some key groups that we think are hesitant, and they are other black, white and black African, Pakistani, other white, non-British, Chinese and African. So all these groups have got either high levels of hesitancy or rejection. And one thing to notice there is that there are quite a few groups with a black heritage, like other black, white and black African, Caribbean, African. So there could be an issue amongst those groups. So the next thing to look at is we're going to have a look at barriers to taking the vaccine. And we asked the question, are there any issues that might influence whether or not you take the vaccine? And they could pick from a number of different options. And you can see there's two clear themes coming through, coming out top, and that's efficacy and the potential side effects. They were the two major concerns. However, there were other concerns that came through, and you can see number 3 and number 4. I don't want to leave home and catch COVID, or I don't want to catch COVID at the NHS location. So these are themes around they're worried about going out and getting the vaccine and getting COVID while they're getting the vaccine. And if you collapse those two similar themes together, you get almost a third, 29% of people were reluctant to leave home because of that. Now, there were other things as well that came through. There were people saying they were at low risk of COVID, therefore they don't need it, which could have a big impact on uptake. If they don't feel they need it, they won't take it. Also, I don't trust the government, 12%. 10% said transport problems. Also, my faith in religion, 6%. That was coming through at quite a low level. And we have noticed that in the press, a lot of people are talking about that, but that didn't really come through quite so much in our survey. So what we're going to do now is we're going to cut this data by propensity to take the vaccine. So what we've got, we've segmented the sample in terms of vaccine acceptors in the green, vaccine hesitants in the yellow, and vaccine rejections in the red. And you can see that the vaccine rejectors in the red are much more likely to say potential side effects as being a concern about the vaccine. Hesitance as well, but only slightly more than the acceptance. But what's also interesting is how well the vaccine works is the same for all three groups. So while that's a concern, it's a concern for all groups, so it might not be as much of a driver of take-up as other factors. And what's also interesting is that the vaccine hesitants have got slightly more functional concerns. You can see that they're more likely to worry about leaving home and catch COVID, or they don't want to catch COVID at the NHS location. And also they're a bit more worried about transport problems, or the fact that some of the vaccines require 2 doses, which could be linked into this issue about they don't want to leave home. Now, in terms of the rejectors, they're very strong and they don't trust the government. So there's trust issues there about the government amongst the rejectors, but also amongst the acceptors as well. They are less likely, more likely to mention that. So the next issue we're going to talk about is an issue about immunity. In the questionnaire, we asked the statement, once you've had COVID, you are immune. And people could respond to that on a 5-point agree scale. So they could say anything from agree strongly to disagree strongly. And what we found is 30% of the sample thought that once you've had COVID, you're immune. And clearly this could have an impact on take-up, because if you're immune, if you think you're immune, you might not take the vaccine. And what we found is that here we've again split the data by acceptors, hesitants, and rejectors. And you can see that the hesitants are much more likely to think that if you've had COVID in the past, you are immune. And one other interesting fact is that hesitants were more likely to think they've had COVID. 30% of hesitants thought they'd had COVID. So this attitude could be a powerful reason behind their hesitancy. Okay, next we're going to have a look at NHS workers. So we're going to have a look at take-up of the vaccine amongst NHS workers. And on the left, we've got the NHS workers. On the right, those people who don't work in the NHS. And what you can see there is NHS workers' acceptance of the propensity to take the vaccine is much stronger. 64% top box against 33% top box for those who don't work in the NHS. However, level of rejection is quite similar between the two groups, and we've still got high rejection even amongst NHS workers. 12% said that they wouldn't take the vaccine, comparing with only 14% for those who don't work in the NHS. And this is something that has been highlighted in the media at the moment, that some NHS workers don't necessarily want the vaccine. So we're going to drill down a little bit more and try and understand who is it within the NHS that might not want the vaccine. And on this slide, I want to draw your attention to the 2 columns on the right, where we split the results by male NHS workers and female NHS workers. And you can see that acceptance of the vaccine is much, much higher amongst men than it is amongst women. 74% top box against 56% top box for women. And you can see the levels of rejection amongst men are much lower than they are amongst women. You've got 17% of female NHS workers saying that they will not take the vaccine. Now, we don't necessarily know why this is the case, because this was a quantitative exercise and we weren't able to drill down as much to find out why. But some insight also comes when we have a look at social grade. And you can see on the left-hand side, we've segmented the sample according to those people in social grades A, B, C1 and C2 DE. And you can see that the greatest resistance comes from those NHS workers in C1 social grades. Now that is people like office workers or admin staff. So it suggests that the greatest resistance is amongst women and amongst admin office workers. Okay, the next fact that we're going to go through is take up of the vaccination by areas of deprivation. And what we were able to do is when we had 4 postcodes, we segmented the sample into using their postcode into areas of high deprivation and areas of lower deprivation. So we've got less deprived areas, more deprived areas. And you can see that the more deprived areas, rejection is much higher. 15% of those people in more deprived areas will not take the vaccine. That's almost 4 times as much as those people in the less deprived areas. So take up is likely to be much lower in areas of higher deprivation. So what we're going to do now is have a look at concerns people might have in areas of higher deprivation. And those people in areas of higher deprivation are in the purple line, and those in less deprived areas are in the green line. And you can see that they are much more likely to have concerns about efficacy and also around the potential side effects. And in truth, they've got more concerns across virtually all the issues, like, don't want to leave home and catch COVID or catch COVID at the NHS location. So they have a wider range of concerns than people in less deprived areas. So what we're going to do now is we're going to move on into some other areas. And the next key fact is all about the impact of COVID on health. And what we did is we asked the question about whether 3 aspects of their health have got better or worse during COVID. And we asked about overall health, emotional well-being, and physical health and fitness. Now, I should point out we use the term emotional well-being rather than mental health because we felt there was some stigma amongst these communities about the term mental health. So we used emotional well-being. And they were able to say whether it got better or got worse than before COVID. And in the areas in the pink and red are those people who thought it had got worse. And you can see that there's large groups of people who feel their health has got worse. And in particular, emotional well-being. 54% thought that their emotional well-being had got worse since before COVID. Now, this could have a huge impact. All these measures could have an impact of problems coming down the line for the NHS. And also these could have issues about the resilience of families and communities going forward. Because if problems about emotional well-being are widespread, they might not have the same sort of resilience across whole communities or families could get worse, as they might not necessarily have the backup within families and communities that they might have had before. So what we're going to do now is we're going to move on to the next key fact, number 8, which is about whether the NHS is open for business, whether people perceive the NHS is open for business. And we asked the question whether people had wanted to access a health service during COVID but hadn't done. And we found that over 2/3 had said that they hadn't accessed a health service during COVID when they wanted to do it. And the impact has been particularly strong on dentists and opticians, but also consultations with GP and hospital appointments. But to be fair, it's throughout all health services have had an impact. So people aren't accessing health services as they would have before COVID. And again, this could have an impact on health going forward. However, not everyone, we did a follow-up question to try and find out, have people, what's causing them to not access these health services? And we asked the question whether it was their choice to do it or not their choice to do it. And the areas in the blue are those people who said it was their choice not to do it. And you can see that across all the health services, a lot of people are choosing not to access health services. So their behaviours are changing and they're choosing not to do things like consulting with my GP. Half said that it was their choice not to do it. And also you've got a lot of people saying that they hadn't chosen to, it was their choice not to take an NHS flu jab. So that suggests that take up the flu jab is less because of COVID. And also get a COVID-19 test. 15% said they wanted to do that, but they didn't. So this does suggest that there are barriers to getting COVID tests. Now, along on that theme about whether the NHS is open or not, we asked people whether they perceived it to be more difficult to access NHS services than before COVID. And it was a 5-point scale from a lot easier to a lot more difficult. Now, I'm not going to dwell too much on the specific health services, but I just want to draw your attention to the fact that there is a lot of pink on the slide. And these are the people who said it was more difficult to access health services than before COVID. And this does suggest that the message that the NHS is open for business isn't necessarily getting through to people. We're seeing a lot of people not accessing health services, a lot of people changing their behaviour, and a strong perception that it's not open for business. Now, the next key fact is all about trust in messages. And we asked the question whether people trusted information from official sources. And we asked about the NHS, national government and local government. And they could say they either trusted it totally or mostly trusted it, or they didn't trust the information. And the blue is these are people that I trusted it totally or mostly trust the information. And you can see that trust in NHS information is much, much higher. Now, this could than it is for national government or local government. So this could have implications about how you badge communications. NHS information is trusted more. The other thing to point out is national government and local government trust is quite equal between those two groups, although it's fair to say that trust in the national government bottom box is a bit stronger. Now, the implications of that is shown on this slide here, where we've cut the data by vaccine acceptors, hesitants and rejectors. And you can see amongst the rejectors, now this shows the percentage of people who trust totally or mostly trust the information. Now you can see that amongst vaccine rejectors, 69% trust totally or mostly trust the information from the NHS. Now that is significantly higher than it is for national government or local government. So if you want to target rejectors, information from NHS is trusted much more. And it's true for all those groups, information from NHS is trusted more. Now, fact number 10, this follows the theme of trust. And in the questionnaire, what we did is we asked questions about lots of different media channels. We asked whether they used them. And as a follow-up question, we asked whether they trusted the information. And what we've done on this slide is we've mapped out levels of trust. So the further out the line is from the access, the more they trust it. And we've collapsed the ethnic groups down into white non-British, mixed, Asian and Black ethnic groups. Now, a couple of things to point out here is that the Asian groups have generally got more trust. They in the pink line, they are generally a little bit further out. However, you can see that the mixed ethnic groups, they have lower levels of trust in media channels, and their line tends to be more towards the centre. Now, I should point out this lack of feeling in trust isn't just about media. This extends to government as well. And we ask questions about their opinion of the government handling of the COVID crisis. And those in mixed ethnicities were much more critical and much less likely to trust the government than other ethnicities. So there does seem to be an issue there. Now, we also asked about more informal or community networks. And again, we've collapsed the ethnic groups down to white non-British, mixed, Asian and Black. And we asked them whether they'd got information about COVID from these sources. And I think the key takeout from this is in the green line, you can see that the white non-British have much less community sources of information about COVID. They're much less likely to access friends, work colleagues or family members than other ethnic groups. So they have less connection with the local community. However, what's also interesting, the white non-British are more likely to access family members outside of the UK. So that they have more likely to have community channels outside the UK than other groups. So that basically takes us through the 10 key facts, but one final bonus fact that we've included for this one is that we asked information about the term BAME to try and understand what people thought of the term. And what we found is that a third of the sample hadn't heard of the term BAME at all. So that is generally, that does suggest that, there is more to be done to get awareness of the term out. And we also asked the question whether people thought it was an appropriate term or whether it was the term applied to them. Now, we asked those questions after we'd given them a definition of what the term is. And you can see that, 2/3 of people thought that the term applied to them, but perceptions of whether the term was appropriate were much more muted. Just over half thought it was an appropriate term, and you've also got about 17% who thought that it wasn't an appropriate term. So you've got a large minority of people who don't necessarily think it's an appropriate term. Now, if we have a look at that by ethnic groups, you can see that there's some ethnic groups that are less likely to think the term is appropriate, particularly white non-British. They are less likely to think it's appropriate. White and Asian backgrounds, other mixed ethnic backgrounds, and also Chinese backgrounds were less likely to think that it was appropriate to them. Now, what's interesting is that the Pakistani and Bangladeshi respondents were slightly more polarized. While they had a large group of people who thought it was appropriate, they also had a large group of people within that community who didn't think it was appropriate as well. So their view was a little bit more polarized. Now, we also asked people an open-ended question about whether, what would be an appropriate term. And there's quite a lot of rich information there. And two key themes that did come out was that people were saying, well, it's a term that you shouldn't lump everyone together, that this term is too broad, that they shouldn't pigeonhole people, and that there's a much wider community out there than the term BAME can encompass. And also people were saying that the term maybe ethnic minorities is preferred to BAME, and so that could be a potential substitution for it. But these data do suggest that perhaps there is some resistance to the term in the community, and that alternatives could be used. So I'm going to pass on to Karen now.
Thank you, Duncan. Okay, are we moving forward on the slides? Yes. So we're going to very shortly open up and take some questions that have been popping up in the chat box about the data that we presented. But just before we do that, we'd like to share with you just how we've been using this insight in Cheshire and Merseyside already, and how we're applying it to a campaign. As Edna said at the beginning, we are seeing lower uptake via certain ethnic groups, and we've been working on using this data to create a campaign to tackle that situation. So using the data that you've just seen presented, we've picked up on a number of areas. So first of all, we've focused in on that hesitant group that we've got, that 20% of our ethnic communities that are saying they don't know whether they're going to take the vaccine or not. When we cross-reference these groups against the actual vaccine take-ups, we're seeing some real resonance there. So we're seeing that these are the people that aren't going forward and having their vaccine. So we've used the data to understand what are the specific issues via these groups, and understand the sort of nuances via the different ethnic groups to pull out what are the strongest concerns for each group. We're then really keen to make sure that the messages we get out there are going to be trusted. So we have badged it with NHS. It has been led by the partnership, which is wider than the NHS, but we're badging all our communications with the NHS. This authenticity and this use of community figures to reassure has been a key part of how we've approached it. We've gone through all of the 8 ethnic groups and found community members, both medical and non-medical, to actually be the voice of this campaign, to give real authenticity to it. And we selected our media choice really carefully to make sure that we're getting the right mix of reach and trust within each of these specific groups that we're seeing are to be most likely to be hesitant. And then we've laid on top of the whole campaign the view that we're really wanting to reach those more deprived BAME communities. So we've used the data which Jeff showed last week and is showing again at the end today to actually pinpoint the postcodes which have the most deprived BAME communities in those 8 most likely to be hesitant ethnic groups. And we've laid a DM, a door drop that's going to go to those areas, and also a targeted digital geo campaign. So that's what we've done. That's how we've used the strategy. And in terms of the campaign itself, it's a very straightforward campaign. We are tackling the issues straight on with very simple, clear language. We can see here we've branded it NHS, and we've used a whole vast number of the different ethnic voices that are really representative of the 8 different communities. And we have a direct call to action: when it's your turn, get vaccinated. And if I just you can see here how we have adapted it for each of the different communities that we're trying to get across to, pulling out those issues that are the most concern for each of those sub-ethnic groups. And just finally, just to show you that, you know, this campaign has got lots of layers to it. We've created 53 little mini box pots of each of our cast members talking and answering those vaccinations, some in their own mother tongue. We've got a whole social campaign going out and a door drop, as well as a PR campaign and radio campaign that is wrapping around it. Okay, I'm just going to hand over to Edna.
Oh, I forgot this was the final slide for me to do. Oh, just to say, in terms of how we're going to deliver this campaign. So what we, as a system, we recognise, because of economies of scale, we, the partnership, have led the way in developing all this insight and then developing all the materials which is informed by our insight. But we've worked really closely with our partners across Cheshire and Merseyside, in particular the areas that have a high BAME population, so Liverpool, some the Cheshires, the Wirral. And what we are supporting is we are creating all these creatives and making them fully customizable. So each of our places will then be able to pick up those materials and adapt them and use them for their own personal use. So we recognise, in particular for vaccine rejectors, that some of these mechanisms, some of these engagement mechanisms aren't going to work, or the comms mechanisms. There'll need to be some targeted community engagement with working with influencers, and our places are the best place to do that. But we will be leading, as Karen said, a PR campaign, a social campaign, adverts in community publications, door drops, radio and radio advertising, and all of that is based on, when we ask the questions about to the people that took part in the survey, which mechanisms do you trust, which mechanisms do you use? We are using that to inform our approach, and also the offer is there. So as we in the partnership, we see everyone as part of our family. So all these materials and products and assets that we are developing, we are going to make them available for others to use. So we feel like we are, because we're taking such a targeted insight-led approach, there might be some nuances and some changes that you might need to make locally, but actually we think that this could work across a number of different communities and areas. Okay, I'm going to take the slides down now, and I'm going to come back to some of the questions. So if you want to use the chat box, or you will be unmuted in a moment, if you want to raise your hand, I will come to you with the question, if you have a question. So first of all, let's stop presenting. Can you stop presenting, whoever's presenting? Great. Thank you. And also, I'm going to say it's absolutely fantastic to see so many lovely faces on the seminar, on the webinar, because obviously we had to book it in quite late, and we still managed to achieve over 100 people, so including our presenters. So I suppose this just shows to us how important this work is and how much support there is for the work. So I have a few questions. First of all, Duncan, would you be able to answer the question from Mike Walker? He asks the question, did you do any statistical significance testing and confidence intervals on the results, given the small sample size in some areas, to the confidence in your results?
Yeah, we have done some significance testing, and I mean, it is difficult because some of the small sample sizes are quite small, so they'll never be statistically significant. But some of the issues that we found, for example, amongst, say, for example, the mixed ethnic groups, about their lack of trust in government and media, a lot of that was statistically significant. So we're fairly confident that those results were robust. And also a lot of the differences between the hesitants, rejectors and acceptors of the vaccine were statistically significant.
Thank you, and I'll stay with you, Duncan, if that's okay. A few people have asked questions about fertility and if that cropped up at all as part of some of the insight that we received.
Well, it cropped up a couple of times in the open-endeds. There were some comments from some young women who said that they didn't want to take the vaccine because they were looking to start a family. But beyond that, we didn't include it in the questionnaire. We wrote the vaccine questions at a very early stage where the full range of concerns weren't particularly clear. So there's nothing within that survey, but it is an issue that we have included in the qualitative focus discussion guide. So hopefully we'll get more insights from the focus groups on this.
Thank you. I have a question from Sue Cummins. You've got your hand up. Do you want to unmute and ask the question, Sue?
Thank you. I was the first to put my hand up when you said you could ask questions.
Yeah, you were, got you.
Thank you, Edna. We have quite a large network of community groups in Liverpool, which we've already engaged around COVID, and are very, very willing to sort of share information, especially around vaccines. What physical assets can I offer them to share? So the things that they're looking for is like Facebook posts, social media posts. This door drop you mentioned, is there anything physical that you can give me that I can actually pass over to them?
Yeah, so I can answer that question. So we have created, so we've got leaflets, door drops, so all of that material, posters, all the digital assets. So I've got those sitting in, to be fair, we are waiting for them to be signed off by the regional team. But what we do have is we've got, I think, 50 odd videos that we've shot and edited with different people across the whole of Cheshire and Mersey, with different messages in different mother tongues. So we've got all of those, so video assets. We've got posters and digital images that you've got for the social assets. There's also, in terms of the physical stuff, we are doing a door drop. We're doing a door drop to almost 10,000 homes. And what we've done is we've selected the homes that have, or the postcode areas that are in the most deprived areas and have a population of, have at least 25 of their population being from a BAME community. But what we've had to do is to make it a little bit inclusive, because we recognise that there'll also be some people that live in that community that aren't BAME. So we've made the images, and also some of the messages and some of the issues that are facing our BAME communities are going to be the same with people in different areas. So that stuff will still work. So we're doing some of that. However, as you can appreciate, we couldn't print all of that for all of our places. So what we are doing is creating all of those materials and then passing them on to you guys. So if you wanted to print them and adapt them and things like that, that would be, they're there for you to be able to use.
When will that be available, Edna?
Fingers crossed this week. But as I say, we're just waiting for sign off. Chris, I can see you've popped up. Do you want to say something?
Thank you. Only just because I just heard that question then. Yeah, we are hopeful of being able to sign these off fairly quickly. Fingers crossed. But there's a lot of people, you know, with a sort of say, but it's pretty straightforward. And as soon as they are signed off, we will be able to share them widely.
Thank you.
Thank you. So I'm just going to have a look at some more questions. Is there any other hands up before I go to the chat box? Does anyone else have a question they would like to ask live? Okay, so I'll go to the chat box. There's a question about easy read materials and learning disabilities. So nationally, they have created a number of materials that are easy read and for people with learning disabilities. So so I can share that. I can put those on our microsite so you can access those. We haven't particularly created our materials with that in mind, but we'll have a look at that, whether we can actually create something that is easy, because we do also recognise that people in some communities that English isn't their first language, actually very simple English works quite well with those communities. There was another person that asked the question about the tool, interactive tool. So just to reiterate, if in case you missed the beginning of the meeting, we are going to do the interactive tool, but at the very end, because it was very split on whether people wanted us to showcase that tool again. So if you do want to see it, then we are doing it at the very end when you can ask Jeff some questions about it as well. I can see there's a hand up. Who is that? Fatomo, do you want to unmute and ask your question?
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you. That was a really, sorry, I can't put my camera on because I'm working off a hotspot on my mobile phone, so my apologies. Thanks so much. That was a really helpful, really interesting talk. I noted, I came in a little bit later, but I didn't note that you mentioned, I think Duncan mentioned the trust, in terms of trust of government, trust of information that was coming through. But there's a lot of, I mean, I think there is a knowledge that trust stems from somewhere. That trust stems from a knowledge of inequalities, be they structural, political, racial, you know, these health inequalities and social inequalities. There's a basis to that lack of trust. So so there's something about modeling comms to be able to speak to, you know, to contact the people and perhaps, you know, turn the tide. But what is being done though at a local level to address those health and social and political structural inequalities that have made life chances far more difficult for this population? They know it. They feel it, and they don't see a big, you know, if they think that not taking the vaccine is a massive thing, that's no small feat. What is being done locally in that context? That's, well, sorry, it was a bit convoluted.
No, you know, I think that is such an important question and such a relevant question. And Chris, who is my boss, will tell you this is the kind of battle that I'm having with the national and regional team about some of our messaging. My fear is that at the moment we're in danger of demonizing people from our BAME communities because they're being seen to be these people that don't want the vaccine, but are not maybe recognizing some of the reasons and real legitimate reasons why there is fear, there is concerns, there is a lack of trust. So I do agree. I think that we need to think about our messaging and think about how we respond and engage with people, with our BAME communities differently, because otherwise it will be quite divisive and we'll end up with people, our BAME communities, feeling even more alienized because they're seen to be not wanting the vaccine. So I do agree. And part of this research and for phase 3, partly that is we're wanting to ask that question. Well, what is it that we can do to help build that trust? What is it that we need to, how can we do things differently? So it is definitely on our radar. So thank you very much for the question.
Thank you, Edna.
So I think that takes us perfectly to the right time to be able to go to, unless there's we've got maybe 1 more minute or so, unless if there is any other question. Otherwise I'll move on to the breakout rooms. Okay, so I'm just going to share my screen whilst I again just talk through what we're going to do. So in a moment, we will put you into, that's actually 6 breakout rooms now, because we reduced the numbers. There will be a facilitator and there'll be a scriber in each of those rooms. The there'll be these questions will be there. You see, you can take a note of the questions, but they'll be on the screen as well in your breakout room. And we want to try and have a really good discussion for about 25 minutes or so. And as I say, this is really an opportunity for to chew the fat with other people that work in the same field, but also help us to really shape the third part of our research. So let's see if the technology is going to work for me. So any minute now, you should be taken by through cyberspace into these rooms. Anyone that hasn't been put in a room for any reason will stay here, and then I can allocate them. There was one person when I tried to allocate them to a room that told me, it said, "Oh, you're all disappearing. That's it, you're going."
Have you gone out? Is it back? Oh, we're back.
Sorry.
Duncan, can I just say quickly, sorry, it's Bridget. Again, it would just be kind of like re-exploring the issues that I've brought up, pretty much what is being done. How can central government support local government just to kind of like, you know, tackle the root cause of all these issues around hesitancy? It's not just surface level, it's really root deep.
Okay, I'm gonna draw a line. Sorry, I recognise everyone's been having some really interesting conversations, but I'm trying to keep to time as much as I can. I hope that you did find that useful. I was weaving in and out of some of the rooms, so it was good to hear some of the conversations. So just want to give you a quick overview of next steps, what we're going to be doing, where we're moving from here. So as I say, I hope people have got something out of today. And can I ask everyone to go on mute if you're not already, if you're not speaking, please. We are going to collate all of the notes and write them up, and they'll be available on our the microsite. We are still analysing the data. As I've said before, it was 25 minutes survey, and we've got so much intel. What we've done is to distill it into sort of 10 key facts or so, but there's so much more. So that will be available on the microsite. We've provided a booklet, and this is only relevant really to people that live around, you know, the work in the Cheshire and Mersey area, but we've been able to create this booklet, which is a detailed breakdown of all of our ethnic groups across Cheshire and Mersey in the different places. That will be on our microsite. We start the qualitative research this week, and that will be going on for a few weeks. So we will be delivering that research informed by some of the conversations we've had today. So thank you very much for that. And as I've said, as we showed you, the BAME campaign will start hopefully next week if we get the sign off that we need. So just want to wrap it up just to say thank you so much for coming back after last week, and B, for just the level of support, the level of interest is just really, really heartwarming, because I think this is such an important issue, and an area that we possibly have neglected over the years. Hence why we find ourselves in the situation that we're in. So as I said at the start, I hope that this is just the start of the work that we will do continuously to understand not just people from our BAME communities, from just groups that are kind of more marginalised, groups that are seldom heard, groups that, to be honest, are the ones that are being disproportionately impacted and who are where we have that biggest inequality gap. So I think we just need to continue doing work like this and supporting those groups, but ensuring that we give them the right support, which is informed and insight-led. So you should receive a link to our microsite with all of those resources within the next 48 hours or so. We'll also include the recording, which will probably come a day or so later once we just edit it and all the rest of it. Now, the exciting bit, we hope to be able to invite you back to another webinar in a month or two's time, probably towards the end of April, where we will be able to share with you some of the outputs of phase 3, which has been, as I said, shaped and supported by you guys. So I think there's some stuff coming up in the chat. I am going to leave it there in terms of unless there is anything anyone wants to say very quickly, we've got about a minute or two left. Let me just check whether, Ryan, can you unmute everyone, please? So people can speak if they want to. Yeah. And if you have, thank you. And if anyone does want to, if anyone's got a quick question or observation they would quickly like to make, if you want to just stick your hands up and I'll get to you. Or if not, okay. Well, I guess you've done enough talking today. So again, thank you very much. Now, for those people that want to see the interactive tool, now I think it's worth staying for if you haven't seen it before, or if you would like to understand a little bit more, or if you want a private demo, because we've got Jeff on the line still here that is happy to do a demonstration of this interactive tool that we've created that helps us drill down into our communities in Cheshire and Mersey, and he will answer any questions that you have about how we created it, you know, the data that's used to inform it. So Jeff, are you there? Do you want to share your screen for those people that are still in the room?
Yep, I'll do that right now. Thank you. And here we go. Hopefully you can all see this. So the challenge we faced at the beginning of this was we knew that we had information about where different ethnic communities may reside contained within the 2011 census data. However, 10 years has passed since those data were collected and analysed, and we've got another census coming up this year, important to contribute to that. And I think that the key thing was we know that populations drift, they change, they move. And in fact, in our last breakout session, some part of the commentary and discussion was around newer incoming communities such as Syrians, Iraqis, and so on, and older communities becoming more established. So clearly things change. So what we did is we combined ONS and schools census data to try and generate a likely location for different BAME communities. And that's what you can see on this map at the moment. It's all of the 9 local authority areas that we were looking at. And at the moment, this is just where all BAME communities potentially reside or are likely to reside. The school census data, for those who don't know, they are collected first academic term of every new year, and they're usually submitted around the October time by schools. And part of that data collection includes the ethnic group that a child may belong to. So we've used that to try and anchor the geography and the profile of the population in those areas. And those areas we've used are lower super output areas, so usually contain somewhere between 1,500 and 2,500 residents. So that's where we approach this, and we've munged that data together to try and provide a map-based view of different communities and where the greater and fewer numbers of people may be in those communities, and you can see that in this picture here. So that's how we can move around. We can see here that different communities, they do overlap, but they also reside in separate areas as well. Part of the challenge was to try and identify the postcode sectors for the targeting campaign undertaken by Influential, and so we can break these out into different postcode sectors. But the thing we did do is right from the get-go, we thought, not all people live in the same kind of area. One of the nice things that the government does every year is produce the indices of multiple deprivation or on a frequent basis, and the latest are for 2019. So we wanted to ask the question, across a particular ethnic group, do they live in more or less deprived areas, and what do those areas look like? And so we can see the results here. This is for the Bangladeshi groups. And we can see that the different measures here of the indices of multiple deprivation, the lower the score, the more deprived an area. That's the thing to remember. And higher the scores, the less deprived the areas. And we can see how they break up into 2 different clusters. So here's cluster 1, and there's cluster 2. So we can see those, and Influential have used that, and you've seen some of the data that Duncan presented a little bit earlier. So the idea was to try and pull together some information really quickly to inform where to target people. And of course, we can assess potential populations and other data. All of the data we have are available to download, click of a button, and you'll get it in a file format you can open up and read within Excel. And then just for completeness, what we looked at was we brought in census data as well, just so people can have access to the prior census information. So that was the brief we had, and we turned this around, and it's being used to try and inform the work that's currently undertaken and some of the excellent results we've seen today. That's me done.
Okay, thanks. So that was a quick whistle through. So there are still people on the call. So I'm going to ask anyone that is on the call if they have any questions for Jeff, or if there's anything that they would like to see, if you would like him to use the tool in a particular way to drill down in a particular area of particular ethnicity, just to see it working live, please do put your hand up or put in the chat if you would like, if you have a question or would like a kind of almost a personal demo. So we've got Mel Roach, who was quick off the mark. She's got her hand up. Have you got a question, Mel?
Please, yeah, thanks. This is amazing. This absolutely brilliant tool. I'd definitely be wanting to use it. Just wondering, could you remind me how we access the tool, please? Where does it sit?
Where does it sit? Well, this is an interesting question. So we're in the process of having a conversation about what we can do with this tool. So what we have created is some outputs that kind of present this data in a kind of a readable way in the form of a brochure. But I understand that actually getting your hands on the tool will enable people to be able to really drill down by street level. There are some risks with that, because at the moment we can drill down to any particular street and be able to see roughly maybe 10 people from a particular community live on a particular street. So there are risks attached to that from a data protection point of view. So we are still in discussion, if I'm totally honest, about how we're going to make this work. But what we do want to do is somehow give some access to our partners. We just haven't worked that through, because to be honest, that's not originally what we built it for, but we understand the applications are far reaching from what we originally needed it for. So that's not a really clear answer, Mel. It's a kind of I'm not really sure.
But no, I completely appreciate where you're coming from, and certainly in fairly recently done some social media work around some CVD prevention messages and wanted to try and focus that on some of the BAME communities. But say working through Facebook, that functionality had been removed, presumably for similar types of concerns. But if I can get in touch, would Jeff, would you be the main point of contact if we wanted to follow this up at all?
So if you come through me, and then if you come through me, Mel, we can look at that. But I think
wonderful.
that is, as you just say, that is absolutely the type of application where this tool would be useful.
Yeah. And sorry, Edna, can I just jump in as well, just to say, Mel, I know Edna touched on this before, but we have created a 46-page document where we pulled out all the penetration within our catchment area, so you can understand by place and by each ethnic group where they are, what that makeup is. So there's an awful lot of the work and done already for you, which is accessible. Is it now, Edna?
In the booklet.
Yes,
yeah.
that booklet, and that will be
okay.
That will be available on the microsite. That we have actually made that available, but we'll put it on the microsite again. Got another hand up. Is that Yinka? Oh, I've got a few hands up. Sorry. I'll start with. So was it Yinka?
Yes, that's right. Hello. I just wanted to see the data for Wirral, because a lot of times people say, oh, we don't have that many people. I work for the Community Health Trust, so I was just interested in the general ethnic minority, the BAME data for Wirral, because, like you said, the census is not very accurate. So just the numbers, really. Thank you.
So just in terms of the raw numbers, so again, in this booklet that we've created, I think that will be really useful for you, because we've got a profile of Wirral in itself. But Jeff is just doing a bit of a hovering over now of the Wirral area. Can you do for all ethnic minorities, Jeff?
Yeah, well, kind of. Yeah, I mean, this is. We've constructed this interface for a particular use, and that question is a very good question. And Pfizer, you asked the question in the comments as well. Could you see the ethnicity spread for Liverpool 8? They're kind of just taking the data and then repurposing them and giving them a different view. So I think if this does go out to a wider community for those type of uses, those kind of questions need to be factored into the design of another window on it, another way of cutting the data. So the answer is we could. we can't answer that precise question today, but all of the data are there, and it's just a matter of a little bit of coding and programming to bring it through to the front end.
But if I can just come back in again, Edna, just to say that the booklet that we've done, we've really tried to take all the legwork out of this tool and make it really accessible to people in the partnership. And we have a whole page on Wirral which says this is the total number of your ethnic audience, this is the breakup, this is what the penetration is of each of them, and a bit of an understanding of where they are. So that is just accessible, ready for you to have a look at after this call.
Great, and Joe Roberts, thank you very much, has very helpfully put the link to that booklet in the chat. So if you want to download it, it is actually on our website at the moment, but the link is in the chat if you want to download it, and you can see the profile for Wirral. Right, I'm just going to whiz through a couple of the other hands that we've got up. So we've got Sarah.
Sorry, yeah. So I work for Wirral as well, so it's the same as Yinka.
Okay.
So I'd be really keen to see the data at that level. And the other thing I was going to mention was, you talked about identifying people on a kind of GDPR, level.
Yeah.
Schools have that information, and obviously because you've got it from the census, and I just wondered whether that would be communicating, from perhaps another trusted source. I know it didn't come out in the report, but it could be another method. Really, that's all I'm thinking about.
Okay, as in a comms method to get messages out via schools. Yeah, I think that's a good point. We didn't specifically ask for that via the research, but I do think that I know schools are a trusted source. So I think that's in terms of engagement, I think the local areas, I would agree that actually if they concentrated some of their engagement via the schools, I think that could be a good avenue. Thank you.
A lot of, just so you know, quite a lot of schools on Wirral, they've got like family liaison coordinators. So, that information could be disseminated to a specific person who would be able to, engage with the families.
Yeah, that's really helpful. Thank you.
Okay.
Right, I'm going to take Sorry, go on, Jeff.
I was going to say, just right now, I know from personal experience, schools are in a big comms frenzy at the moment, with everybody coming back, and that communications is just going to continue. So, they have got those channels, and they are active channels across schools at the moment.
Thank you. Right, 2 quick questions, and then I'm going to call the meeting to a close. Kathy, and then Andrea.
Yeah, it's not a question as such, it's more of a comment that I suppose to make Jeff's life a bit easier, there are within each of the local authorities and there's the network of voluntary and community sector infrastructure organisations across the region that should be the link people, otherwise you'll just get overrun with people asking you for information. So within Liverpool, and I'm sure within other organisations and Health Watch, they have their consortiums and they have their data and intelligence hubs, and so you probably need to think about where this needs to go to. Otherwise, you could have every service within big organisations coming to you, and it just won't be manageable. And just a helpful little
that's really helpful. Thank you, Kathy. I think that's definitely something to think about, because we are already, if you can appreciate, bombarded with requests, because I think we're one of the only, we're not just the only STP or the partnership. We're not the only. We're I think in the country we're the only people doing work, or the area doing work like this. So that hence the level of interest that we're getting from across the country. So I'm just conscious of time, so I'm just going to take one more question from Andrea, please, and then we'll close the meeting.
It's just a quick one, and I apologize if you already mentioned that, Jeff. It's about updating the database. How frequently do you expect to the data to be updated? I suppose it's depending of the source of information you are using right now, but just how do you plan to do it?
Jeff, do you want to answer that?
Of course, yeah, the school census data comes out annually, so it can be updated relatively quickly. So all of the programming, the scripts are there to ingest data quite rapidly. And any population projections produced by ONS usually come out around June. So the next, a next update would probably be sort of two parts: the population estimates and then the school census data added to that. But also, we've had good feedback from folks at the University of Liverpool, and some ideas there of how to improve this yet still. So it is a work in progress. It's a live thing. It's not something that we consider to be finished today.
Brilliant. Well, it's thank you so much, Jeff, and thank you for the last people standing that are still on the call and still engaged. We really do appreciate that. But I think I'm going to call time now. And again, thank you very much. And can I just ask my wonderful helpers and everyone that's helped? Well, actually, I want to thank my wonderful helpers, all the facilitators, all the scribers, all my team, Influential, Public Health England, all of those people that have supported this project. Yeah, couldn't do it without you, and I'm just delighted at how well this has gone so far. So thank you very much to all of my helpers and supporters, and that includes you that actually contributed to the session as well. So I'm going to let everyone go apart from my wonderful helpers because I need them for a few more minutes. But thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you,
and
everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Thank you very